Hi, everyone. We're going to get started. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Joy McFarland. I am the product marketing manager for the US and Canada and for this product, English in Action. So I'm very excited that you could all join us today. I would like to introduce our presenter, Caroline Mckinnon. She is the head of teacher training at Rennert in New York City and also the founder and president of an NGO in New York City called FELT that helps immigrants and refugees in the New York City area. So she will be taking us through some new ways to teach English in action right now in this new reality that we are all in when you are home and maybe your students don't completely have access to all the materials like they would in your classroom. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. You guys are all muted just so that during the webinar there's not noise. But if you have any questions, I will be manning the chat and answering any questions whenever we can. This webinar is going to be recorded, so you will be receiving the recording in a few days in an email, a follow-up email. But any questions that you have, I will try to answer them, and Caroline will be taking some questions at the end. So without further ado, Caroline, I will turn it over to you. Please unmute yourself and tell us all of your information.
Hello to everybody. I'm here in New York City. I'm in Brooklyn at the moment. As you can hear from my accent, I am clearly from Brooklyn. Um, I'm a Londoner. I've worked in New York for many, many years. And I'd like to share some of my experiences teaching with both English in action, but also by teaching online. Teaching online is something that I'm not new to. I'm new to some of the technology. However, I think that the technology that we have now is far better than it's ever been. So please bear with me. When I actually go through, I will firstly say that there might be a couple of hiccups as I'm trying to bring in the screens myself. I'm using a lot of interactive material and I really want to share it with you. And this is by no means a comprehensive list of things that you can do. These are some of the things that I actually enjoy doing myself. Um, when I'm teaching myself, usually I use class sets. And I'm sure that many of you at the moment don't have class sets. You've probably, if you're anything like the school that I work in, we were forced to go online overnight. And it's been a learning curve. And we're really lucky at Renner in New York that our teachers are amazing and our teachers really stepped up. They stepped up by using great materials. So if you will bear with me, I want to take you through a tour of my ideas. So, we're going to be looking at English in action, and I'm a huge fan of English in action. I use it more with my nonprofit because with my nonprofit, my students are actually looking for real world content and they're often working in the United States, they're looking for jobs, they need to know about civics, some of them need to know academic materials as well. So let's think about this in general. When I first came into online teaching, I really thought it would be boring. Firstly, I came into it as a student myself, and I would sit and the teacher would literally just stare at a screen and read something and expect you to stay awake. But the fact was, the temptation to open your Facebook or your email was always there because, well, personally speaking, I wasn't engaged. I thought it was maybe just me. So I actually spoke to a lot of my friends who have also gone through the process. And their perceptions of online learning were that it was static, that it was non authentic, that it was limiting, and it was boring. It's amazing how the shift in perception can happen. For example, when I'm sitting there talking to my friends, online, it's fun, it's engaging. The minute you put it into a work content, it can sound a little bit daunting. However, I will say this, it's wrong. The internet and online teaching has changed dramatically, and it's changed dramatically with the materials that are there for us. If you think about materials that were there before, they were never designed for you to be teaching online. None of the materials. As teachers, what we love to do is sit in a classroom with our students. We like to be able to look into their eyes, to pair them off, work around. Talk to them. Communication is the reason we want to teach. So I came to Nat Geo because I was working with a lot of students who couldn't, for many reasons, come to class. Lots of my students were undocumented, or perhaps they just didn't have the ability to access education in the right way. And I came to Nat Geo because of the range of online services that they had with their books. And one of them is called My ELT. Now, what I would say is if you are an existing customer of Nat Geo and you don't have My ELT, reach out to them immediately because this source is amazing and it will really help you go through this extraordinary time of teaching. It's very interactive. You can get your students working on it. There are assignments and there are a number of resources that you can use to back up teaching from the book. So for this webinar, I looked at two different levels. I looked first of all at English in Action 1, which is for the lower levels, and I looked at the resources as well. And the section I chose was one that I teach quite often myself about jobs. Students, when they come to the US, need jobs. And anecdotally, when I first came to the US, I had this amazing resume of all the experience I had in the UK. I was an academic director for the biggest school in London, and I wrote pathway programs. And I really thought I will send my resume out and I will get a job. However, I didn't even get a single interview from it. And when I spoke to a friend, she looked at my resume and said, "This is awful. It doesn't look like a resume that would sell in America. You need to change it completely, not just the format and but the language." When I did that, I was lucky enough to get more than one interview actually, and end up getting a job. So it's really important to assume, like, not to assume that students immediately are going to understand what is required of them. Which leads us to, let me go back one slide there. I'm going the wrong direction for you. Apologies. The chapter cover. Now, the chapter cover at work is immediately accessible. I love the color and I love the pictures in this book, but you'll hear me raving about that the whole way through because that's just who I am. On My ELT, there are backup materials that allow for students to really work together, work in their own time, in their own space. You don't actually have to be doing this in class, and I'm a big fan of bringing in work that the students can be introduced to and then take out into their own space. There are some times where they don't want to be sitting at the computer and they shouldn't have to. They can really work independently and come back to you. You can also assign readings and listenings. For the teachers, all the tape scripts are there, plus the audio. The audio is compatible with your phones, so you can download it onto your phone. Many of my students don't have computers, but they have phones, and this works perfectly within the sphere of the phone as well. The book itself really does have integrated skills. And this is one of the reasons I like this book, is because if I only have one book to teach from, everything is covered. I do like to step out of the book. That's a personal thing. And I like to use it as a launch pad. And it's easy to use as a launch pad to other authentic materials precisely because the content of the book is so real world. We can all take a moment just to look at the surfing dog, which I think you'll all agree is amazing. The readings are the kind of readings that you will find in a newspaper. Now, for example, when I was looking at this activity, which is a nice reading, you have everything accessible in that book where you can just take a screenshot if you don't have a copy at home, or you can contact Nat Geo if you have a copy. So you can show your students this and they can work from it. Now, this article you can find in many various forms from the original source on the internet, but it's also something that is amazing for your students to go and find out about dog surfing, dogs doing sport, pet hotels, pet groomers, which is something that quite often I find is really, really special here in the United States. When I first moved over, I remember my mother saying to me, "Oh, you're not going to be one of those people who takes their dogs to a spa and buys them clothes." And of course, I was horrified at the thought. Now my dog wears pink ribbons and, she goes on holiday with us wherever we go. It also has very accessible and real vocabulary. The vocabulary that is chosen for the book is vocabulary that immediately comes off of the page and can be taken outside to the outside world. This chapter in particular, when we're talking about jobs, it's tailored towards the jobs that perhaps our students would be more likely to take on. I remember once teaching a class of refugees a section on jobs from a book that is no longer in circulation, but the book itself had jobs like computer software engineer and CEO. And they were really foreign jobs to my students who were starting a new life in a new country with a new language. So, what I like is to bring it to an accessible level for everybody. Now, here are my biggest tips for you when you're teaching online. Queue everything up. If you don't queue everything up, you might end up, as happened to me not so long ago, that I shared my screen with some students and they saw a really cute picture of me when I was 3 years old wearing a Geronimo swimsuit with Daffy Duck on it that my mother had sent me. It was cute, but it certainly wasn't the kind of thing I wanted to start my class with. I would also recommend that you treat every class as if it is in person because the internet now is so much more accessible that we need to recognize that it is a medium that is much closer than it ever was before. You've probably seen in the recent weeks all the faux pas of people who have been doing Zoom lessons or Zoom meetings and have forgotten they're on camera. There was one case of a woman who went to the restroom, one case of a boss who turned herself into a potato and couldn't turn herself back. So treat the class as if you were there in person. In person, I'm pretty certain you wouldn't go to the bathroom in the middle of your class. Use the book as a springboard. Now, again, many of you probably were caught off guard by what's happening, so you might not have your class materials with you. You might just have the copy you have yourself. And that's great. It's great because everything is there for you to launch out and help your students to explore and take the language into the real world. Allow your students to explore. Teaching online is tiring. Nobody really wants to be sitting in front of a computer the entire time. But if you allow your students to actually share in this process with you, it will feel like a much more collaborative and enjoyable time to spend at your desk. Also, it will allow your students to feel more engaged because they will actively be taking part in where that lesson goes and what they're learning. Now, as a teacher, you would have already set the parameters. You would have chosen the vocabulary or the grammar or the structure that you wanted in the class or the skill you wanted to work on. But allowing your students to take it to the next level is a wonderful thing to do. Get to know the resources in the book. Don't open a page of the book and then think, ooh, maybe I should go back and do this. Always know the book before you go into class. If you're familiar with it, then it's going to seem like a much easier, smoother transition when you're actually teaching it in class. Now, I did have somebody say to me that this meant a lot of extra preparation, and I actually totally disagree because I think that if you have not prepared well, your class can seem much longer and much more arduous. But if you really know your materials, if you've really prepared well, you can enjoy the learning experience that your students are having. So it can actually change the balance and make it a much nicer, like collaborative experience. I also personally assign pre-class tasks. I think that this is very important for the students. If I'm going to introduce them, for example, to surfing bulldog, I might want to get them to Google beforehand, maybe dogs doing unusual um, sports or dogs working, something like that. They can come to class and you've activated the schema, you have them in that space ready to go and start looking at some of the material. Now, what I really love about this book is the fact that it offers both civics and academics. Now, when Joy introduced me at the start, she mentioned that I am the director of teacher training at Renner in New York, but I also work with a nonprofit. So I'm teaching really varied students. My students in my nonprofit quite often are of a low level. They might have a good spoken English, but perhaps they don't have written or skills, or they might be semi-literate. Whereas when I'm teaching in the teacher training courses, I am trying to break down the materials for teachers to then take into the classroom. But it's kind of nice to have a one-stop shop where you know that a book is going to give you both options. So before, when we were looking at the reading, as I mentioned, it was a really authentic, real world reading with the dog, and it could link in different ways. Now it looks at more academic tasks. Now it's very much within the same realm. Again, it's using jobs that students are likely to be familiar with or working within this schema here. For example, here is a listening with a very simple task of true or false. Now, with the listening, I assign the students to listen themselves in their own time. Because what I'm not doing is asking my students to listen under pressure. If I were, that would be a different matter. But, for example, something like this, I want them to really listen. If you don't catch it the first time, listen again. This is something that you can separate. They can listen from themselves and they can bring it back to you. Now, I mentioned before that I think it's a really good idea to use everything that we're talking about as a launch pad. And I want to share with you a couple of my favorite activities related to the job section that we've just been looking at, which is from Unit 1 of Book 1. Now, I don't know exactly um, what or where you're working. So, Joy, if you wouldn't mind, we have a quick poll. Would like to know where people are working. I will continue talking while you fill this in, but it would be very useful to know what kind of institution you're teaching in. For example, my institution is currently using Zoom, but for my nonprofit, we're currently using WhatsApp. And we're using WhatsApp because most of our students have their phones and WhatsApp they used for their families. The advantage of something like Zoom is it has breakout rooms. So, for example, if you're looking at jobs, you can break out, put students into a room which you can monitor, and they could interview each other. If you don't have access to something like that, then WhatsApp students can talk to each other directly. You could be included. They could do it by text, or they could do it by speaking. They can either record it and send it to you, or you could be invited in to a three-way chat. You could also look at research. And by research, I mean, where do you look for work these days? When I'm looking for work, when most people I know are looking for work, we go to Craigslist or Indeed, Monster, LinkedIn. There are a variety of places that you look for work. So why, in my opinion, why would I fake a job advert for my students when they could actually actively look for one? And as mentioned before, I am in Brooklyn. So I've found a job that is applicable to students who I teach. Um, and I would allow the students to look through this, find a job that suited to them, work with the vocabulary that they've been given before, and then report back on the job. What were people looking for? How did you apply for it? Were there any terms and conditions? Was it full-time, part-time, remote? At the moment, most jobs are remote, but there are still some. For example, this is in person. It's a great activity to get your students looking for work in the same way that they would actively be looking for work in the real world. because that's precisely why they're probably learning English. They want to find a job. They want to find a job that serves their skills. And if you are giving them the tools immediately by Launchpad from the book into real search, you can actually help them really apply this to their daily life. Perhaps a follow-up activity to this would be for them to write an application letter or maybe a resume, and you could lead it into a work skills class. You could stage an interview with the students. It's also very good for the students to actually work together and see who's applying for what job, to share conversations as well. It has a real world application that I love because it's quite often students will come and they'll ask you, how do I find a job? Where do I find a job? How do I apply for a job? And I think it's actually better to say to them, this is how you do it, and let's go out and I'll support you through the application process. That could be set as homework. If they're really applying for a job, you can help them, but within homework time. You might help them find the job that they need. Another activity I love to do, and I use YouTube for this, and there are many, many different resources on YouTube. But there are easy listening practices that you can do where they can listen to a job interview and then they can reenact a job interview with each other as a role play. They can script it using, again, the vocabulary that you would have in the textbook, using it to actually interview each other. It's fantastic practice. It's fantastic practice for two reasons. One, they're going to be speaking, not just listening. And secondly, they probably do need to practice getting a job interview. Now, it could be that you want to practice them doing this over with no visual. So, for example, just the sound. That way, if they're going to be doing a telephone interview, then they might just want to hear the sound of it, because it's a very different skill to speak over the phone and comprehend over the phone than it is actually face to face. So you have the opportunity to really practice both parts of it. What I will say to you though is, while I am recommending YouTube, again, know your source. There is a lot of really bad content on YouTube. So if you haven't checked it out yourself, you really don't know what you could be sending students into. I recently worked with a teacher who Googled ESL vocabulary for Thanksgiving, and what they didn't realize is they actually found a joke site, which was just totally um, irrelevant to the students. Not only that, it was inaccessible. I mean, that isn't what you want to do. You want to make your job easier because you're making your students' studying abilities easier. Get to know the ESL community on YouTube. If you're not finding what you want, find a friend, make a video on your phone, upload it, and create a YouTube channel with your students. You can easily create a YouTube channel where your students can gather the work in. You could also do that on WhatsApp, Google Teams. You can do that via Zoom and an email as well. It's a really nice way sometimes of your students, especially when they're in isolation, to not feel alone. Last week, I actually had students, we were working on a chapter that had vocabulary adjectives to describe yourself. And the students made online dating videos that they just made on their phones and they sent to me, and we privately, until they had permission to share. But it was a really nice way for them to practice the vocabulary in a real setting. Now, I'm not saying that the dating setting would work for everyone, but specifically with these students, they were actively trying to find boyfriends and girlfriends, teenagers. Now, there's also something that I would recommend called Webquest. Now, a Webquest is a really great idea for your students to go away and research using the foundation you've given them, which in this case, the foundation from the book. So they're looking at job vocabulary, they are looking at the various terms and conditions of working, they're using the grammar to explain what they have been doing, etc., etc. Now you can do a web quest. Now, a web quest, if you're not familiar with them, isn't just one page on the web. A web quest is something where you basically go on a quest around the internet to find the answers to something that has been preset. It could be that, for example, you're looking for the oddest job in the world, as it says there on the screen. And when you open this to read, let's have a look. Of course, it's been blocked on this. It's always a technological problem. But it could take you to a list of descriptions of the weirdest jobs in the world. And I don't know if you know this one. There is a Venom Milker. This is one of the weirdest jobs in the world, where it describes the job, and it's to get the venom from snakes in particular that can then be used by the medical community to come up with a serum. Um, and this is a weird job, but it links you from there to then find out what is the most venomous snake. Where does the most venomous snake live? What other things are more dangerous? It's a real quest where they have to come up with the amount of information they're asked in a specific period of time, and then they come back together as a class to review it. It provokes so many discussions. I hugely recommend Webquests. Now, if you type into Google Webquest, you'll find so many, but you could also set it up yourself. So they're quite easy to set up. Again, it's down to the research that you put in at the start. There are also many other ideas like what we have Webquest there, but virtual tours. I'm not sure if anyone has used a virtual tour here before, but I love using virtual tours. I'm lucky in the sense that I work in New York City, so when the city is open, we have all these amazing museums and galleries that we can take our students to. But sometimes there are museums and galleries around the world that you want to visit that are inaccessible to you. And depending on where you are teaching, and I noticed that we have people from Colombia, we have people from Ohio, we have people from all over here. You might not have the same museums, or you might want to go to a museum elsewhere in the world. So bear with me as I take you to the Museum of the World, the British Museum. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to London. And this is a really wonderful little museum. I say little, it's not that little, that you can visit by choosing a timeline. You can choose a continent. So let's have a look at, well, we're in the Americas. So let's click on the Americas and come to here. Oh, look, this dot, what's it going to reveal? So the Americas, it's going to bring us to a Mayan exhibit where we can find out more information. We can listen to the audio from it. We can click on related objects. We can find out where in the world it came from. This is an amazing way for your students to not only explore places and museums, etc., that they might not have access to, but I found it particularly useful when I'm teaching students from countries who don't often get the opportunity to talk about their own culture. It's a good way for them to launch about their own culture. Maybe here we have the Mayan culture. It's a way for them to show the pride in their own countries. Quite often we tell them what they need to look at, but sometimes we should allow them to tell us what they actually want to look at. Again, we could let's go to Europe at this period and see what has on offer. We can find out about the Vikings here. This beautiful brooch. Same thing, we can see where it came from. We can listen to the audio about the history. We can read through it. So there are many different ways that you can use a virtual tour of a museum. Some museums allow you to go from room to room in a very different way. I like the British Museum because I like to go from time to time, but I really love going, for example, to the Natural History Museum in New York and walking through virtually the dinosaurs. It really can be quite good fun to take a class trip. I've also, before, I've assigned my students a museum and they have led a guided tour once they've gone away and done their research themselves. It really would depend on the level of English, but most of this would depend on how you set up the activity yourself. Right now, you could also go to a national park. Why not? There's amazing things going on with Google Arts and Culture. We can go to
One of the southernmost
Florida
points of the United States is home to a Civil War era.
and we can swim for a coral reef, we can go to national parks, we can learn about what's going on in these areas, and we can take our students way out of the realm of normal learning. So, for example, if I'm sitting in a classroom in New York and I'm just looking at New York, that's what I'm going to teach my students. But what online teaching gives us is the opportunity to really explore the world. Everything you want to do is now available online. And in fact, if we want to look at one positive that's come out of the times that we're living in, is the variety of things that are now available to us for free online. I just yesterday took a tour myself of the cherry blossoms in the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens. They've had a cherry blossom watching contest. So there's so much that is available for you once you start looking. So I hugely recommend taking a tour for a park. Again, coming back to my ELT, there are huge amounts of resources there that can also back you up. There is audio, there is visual, video. There are additional exercises. We saw a couple of them early on. They are great if, again, contact your rep if you do need access to it and you're an existing customer, because you can set your students up and they can work independently. You can set them assignments, you can assess their work, you can really create the course from the book onto this platform, which everyone will be able to use. I highly, highly recommend it. We're going to skip to book 4 now, which is a higher level, and we're going to think about education. Now, this one falls more into the realm of academics. Now, we looked earlier at jobs, very practical education. You need a job, you are living in a country, you want to get a job, you need to be able to learn the skills. Many students, doesn't really matter where they started, but many students want to or achieve, aspire to go to higher education within the US. But higher education, again, is very specific country to country. For me, it was again a learning curve. Now, Renner is owned by Berkeley College. We're located within Berkeley College, so we are part of a college system. However, if somebody asks me about college credits, etc., this is very different from my own experience of college. So what I love again about this book here is for the students who are looking to go into higher education, they can look at what it means and how to actually achieve that. So the activity I've highlighted here has really applicable information and vocabulary to use, for example, such as urban, suburban, public, private, 2-year, 4-year, graduate, undergraduate. It's using the vocabulary that the students are going to listen. It's a real college that's being highlighted there, and it's linked to listening as well as practicing the language. Now, again, this is fantastic, and it is easy to use this as standalone with real fantastic results. But when I was researching college for myself, one thing I really wanted to do is know where I was going to study. It made a huge difference to me where I was going to spend 4 years of my life. And I think that that is true for many students. So, for example, I would recommend researching the city where the college is located. So here, for example, we're looking at the University of Texas and the San Antonio branch. So I've brought up a map online. There are interactive maps, but I've brought up a tourist map because I would like to look at where the college is located, what's around it. As a student, I also want to be living my best life in college. So I might want to know what I can do on the weekend, if I need to have a part-time job, etc. So researching a town that is mentioned in the book is a great idea. So if you look here, San Antonio looks like a really cool town. I've never taught there. I've never been to San Antonio. I'd like to go now. I've heard it has amazing river walk. Maybe some of you are from San Antonio, so excuse my ignorance there. But as a student, I'm looking, I love the brewery district for sure. But I want to know what the college is like. Now, the book has given me great information. This map has told me quite a lot about it. So maybe I want to take a tour of the college. Now, this website, it will be available at the end as well. It's fantastic. There are 600 plus colleges on it, and you can go and visit the college of your choice. So come with me to San Antonio, and here we go to the college. Now,
welcome to the University of Texas at San Antonio, San Antonio's largest public university. My name is Daisy, and I'll be your tour guide today. Before we get
let's leave Daisy
the
to pick up
UTSA
with
Welcome
us.
Center provides information about the university, its campuses, and the city of San Antonio. Everyone is encouraged to visit the Welcome Center website and register for a campus tour.
If you can see here, you have a map where we can go to different areas of the school. We can also just walk around the school. We can go into buildings. We can learn about the college by actually looking at the college, by actually visiting the college. Now, this is fantastic because it ties up directly with the book, but maybe you say to your students, would you like to go to the University of Texas at San Antonio? And your students say, oh, no, definitely not. My family live in Ohio and I want to stay near my family. Fair enough. Maybe you come out and you want to look at, let's have a look at Ohio. Now we have other colleges to choose from. So maybe one student wants to go to Ohio State University in Columbus. Again, they can look at the city. They can find out whether it's the right city
Welcome
for
to
you.
Ohio State. My name is Clint, and I'll be your tour guide. This tool lets you explore the Columbus campus with designated stops along the way. Welcome to the Ohio Union. The Ohio Union is considered the living room of campus and the center of student life. Here you'll find lots of places to eat, study, and relax.
So as you can see, this is a really good tool to use to back up something like this. The students have already learned with you and via the book, they've learned about the terminology that's used for applying to college. They know whether it's a 2-year or 4-year college or graduate college. And they can then go and research a college, take a tour, listen for key information, and then report back. They could also give, if you're working within a college setting, for example, I am, your students could give a college tour. They could work on it themselves and give a college tour. This is fantastic because it's like reading, it's listening to instructions, it's listening for key information, plus it's real information for the students. It isn't staged at all. A student at the end of researching this, for example, might know that the Ohio State University in Columbus is a public college. It's a 4-year college, that the tuition is coming from New York. I think the tuition is very reasonable. And that there are 56, almost 57,000 students, which is amazing information to be able to find out. Then it also allows your students to use this information to really apply it to what they're looking for themselves. It's very unusual to have a class of students who have exactly the same dreams and there's the same desire and want to go to the same college, or referring back to jobs who want to have the same job. The book allows for you to use this information and apply it to something that is of interest to the students themselves. There's a mock college application form that the students can work through. They can look for the information. Again, tying back to the virtual college tours we just took, they could use the information from a college that they have chosen and they can fill out the information here. And maybe you could do a college interview with the students. then coming back to my ELT, there are further reading that they can do. There's further listening that they can do to back up and to reinforce the information that they've been learning in each chapter. Now, what I would say to you is when you're teaching, keep it real. Everything that I'm talking about today is really about giving my students something that I know they would enjoy, and they would enjoy it because it is applicable to their life. If I were to just basically pick, say, write a blog post about your latest travel, I don't feel myself that that is authentic enough to the students I have. I feel that if I am looking at jobs and I ask them to write a resume, or if I ask them to do a mock interview, then this is something that will really have an impact on their life and how they can use the English. I believe that if we engage our students and let them do the work, that they will actually learn more. Students, or certainly my students for the most part, are a little bit more tech savvy than me. You know, I'm going to admit it now. I am the older generation, but I'm not a Luddite. I do like to use technology. I like to use different apps with my students. I've done Instagram contests with my students where I've encouraged them to take a chapter from the book and then to find a photo that represents it. The same can be said for vocabulary. Find me something that represents this word. Send me a photo of it. I've asked my students to make LinkedIn profiles, to work on their resumes with me, to work on Twitter. And Twitter is great for higher levels, and it's great for students who you're trying to get them to just narrow down their vocabulary a little bit. Perhaps that they're used to writing 600 words when in fact it could be one sentence. The technology is there, and although this time is unusual and it's frustrating, I think that it's a real time for us to explore and using resources that are there. And the reason again that I love working with Nat Geo is because they have already seen this coming. They have embraced online learning, not now, but before. So for example, I have been online teaching with their materials for probably 5 years now, and that's quite a significant time in our industry. And I just find that it gets better, and my own imagination of what is possible gets better at all. I really think it's about keeping it real, changing the way that you approach it yourself, and realizing that there is so much available to you and your students to use, where it's not you sitting there hour after hour, which, yes, is tiring. It's very, very tiring. And if you're tired, your students are tired. But if you find yourself visiting the Harvard campus and learning about Harvard, your students will really pick up and like to learn that kind of thing as well. So my final tip for you really is to come back to what I was saying before. Prepare your classes. Prepare your classes to the extent that you know it would interest you and it would interest your students. Cue things up. Allow your students to not be sitting in front of you for 3 hours. Allow them to say, okay, you have 30 minutes now to go away and research by yourself, but I want you back in the online learning sphere within 30 minutes, and you're going to report on the information. Allow them to break out and have conversations with each other. This is the reality that we're living in now. I think it's going to change the way education is going, but it doesn't need to be a bad change. I think it can be a really, really exciting change. And honestly, when I go back into the classroom, which, you know, we will all be going back into the classroom at some point, there are so many elements that I want to keep from this experience of being online and learning to use new technology. There's so many things that I want to bring back into the classroom with me, because I've found so many interesting things that have made my lessons better. So I'm coming to the end, and there will be I'm happy to answer any questions as well. But I've linked the resources at the end of this presentation that will be shared with you as well. And just for your reference, I've been using the English in Action 1 and the English in Action 4 for this presentation. one of the hardest things for me when I was putting this together was actually narrowing down what I wanted to speak about, because there are so many chapters that have amazing resources that you can use, but obviously I'm limited on the time where I can talk about them. But really, the scope of this is the scope of your imagination. So if you know that you can spend 20 minutes the day before finding information about X, Y, and Z in your presentation or in your lesson planning, your teaching will be richer for it and your students' experience will be richer for it. I've yet to find sort of a chapter that didn't work as a launch pad to bring things out, to allow people to explore, um, have fun with it. You know, we were in many ways we were all forced to become online teachers, but realistically, this is going to be in demand later on, the ability to be able to teach online and offline. So, you know, Um, embrace it, have fun with it, and I promise you it will be, I look forward to going into my classes. I really do. The photo I showed you on the slide before this, see if I can bring it back. I showed you a photo of a class. That was actually one of my um, breakout sessions where we were doing a quiz where the students had found all the information online from a Webquest and from visiting a museum. So real life examples of how we use it in the classroom. Now I'm more than happy to stop sharing my screen and answer any questions that you might have.
Thanks, Caroline. If there are any questions, please put them in the chat and I will let Caroline know about them. We'll give
Don't
them
be
a
shy.
minute to type. Few people typing, so we'll give them a minute. All right. So looks like questions about cost of books. Catherine, your question about cost, if you could contact your sales representative, they can help you with all of that. And Maria, where you're typing your question right now, that's where you could type the question. Caroline, great question from Gregory. Have you used WhatsApp?
WhatsApp?
Yeah.
Yes. I use WhatsApp all the time. Each one of my classes that I teach, I have a WhatsApp group for the students. One of the added benefits of that is that when you're not actively doing anything with a WhatsApp group, the students will talk together. I use it quite often for homework. I allow my students to just communicate with each other, and sometimes we'll do WhatsApp chat as well. Do I use a picture dictionary for low-level students? Yes, I love picture dictionaries. I will also use an online one, dictionary.com, or sometimes just allowing them to Google under images would be a good way of learning as well, for sure. There was a question about one-to-one. Do your students text you on your personal cell? Yes, they do. However, I do tell them that it's WhatsApp only, and I do set office hours within it. I mean, it's rarely ever broken. Occasionally, over the New Year period, you'll get messages at God knows what hour of students contacting you. But I find in general, students are very respectful of that. I like my students to have my cell number anyway, because if they're going to be absent from class or late, I would rather know about it than wonder where they are.
Martin, you will get a link with this entire presentation that will have that slide in it with all of the different links that she just shared.
Lucia has also said she's learningchocolate.com, which is a good picture dictionary. It's a great picture dictionary. I love that. Rick, I can put you in touch with them because I know Rick personally, so don't worry, I can get that for you. With my students, somebody asked about permission to use their videos. When I use their videos, I only use them within the context of the class. I don't put them out anywhere else, and I will always ask the students. They will send them to me personally, and I will say, you know, this would be really good if we could share it with the class or we could share it with the group. And I will wait. If they give me permission, then I will share it. If not, then I won't. It's never really proven to be a problem, to be quite honest, because there's usually one student who will offer. There's always one student who's quite bold in this sense, so they will be the first to offer to do this, and then it sort of opens up everyone else feeling more confident. Somebody asked about one-to-one teaching as well. I use a lot of these resources for one-to-one teaching. I really do like to break off and use the internet, but most of it, because one-to-one, the contact time is so key there. It's usually a shorter period of time. Lots of it I'll either set as pre-class work or post-class work, unless there's something we want to explore together. I recently did a tour of the Smithsonian Museum with a student where they guided me through it themselves, sharing their screen.
Caroline, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you all for attending. We appreciate your time, and we hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone.